you.
Nice to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too.
Yeah, so nice to have you here.
Thank you for asking me.
It's very Oprah. It could be Alan by the time we've had a cocktail. Okay.
Sugar it's definitely a hot topic at the moment, and I guess to just go back a little bit, one of the things nutrition suffers from, I think, a little bit is the fact that it does have these hot topics. And, it's a complex thing, sugar, protein, carbohydrate, fat, saturated fats, trans fats, or whatever. And they all kind of interact in our diet, and it is the combination and the balance of them that really drives whether or not we're healthy or not healthy. And at the moment, you're probably all aware there is a lot of controversy about nutrition. The World Health Organization has just brought out some new guidelines where they've recommended that we reduce our sugar intakes well below even what their previous guidance was, but down to about a quarter of what we as New Zealanders are eating at the moment. And the basis for that is the fact that they've done a lot of research around the impact of sugar on various aspects of our health. One of the most important aspects is our dental health. So a lot of the guidance is driven by the fact that they know how much sugar, or at least how little sugar, we should be eating in order for the best dental health, not just for us as adults, but for children as well. But they've also done heaps of research that shows that the more sugar we eat, the more likely we are to be overweight. And conversely, as we reduce our sugar intakes, our weight tends to drop as well. And there's an increasing amount of evidence that even apart from body weight and dental caries, that sugar is also associated with lots of other kinds of metabolic problems as well. So the latest guidance that the World Health Organization has come out with is that we should all be consuming 5% or less of our daily energy intakes in the form of sugar. And that's around about 20 grams a day, which is pretty tiny because in New Zealand, on average, adults are consuming over 100 grams a day. So that's a huge change. And I think the bigger question it raises is how do we do that? Particularly when we live in an environment where our food intake is so processed, and so much of what we eat is actually, we have little control over it if we buy it pre-packaged and pre-made and off the shelves. And a lot of the sugar we consume is in the form of processed foods. It's sugary drinks. It's things like sauces, syrups, tomato sauce, things like that. So I think, in terms of, just focusing on sugar, if we really want to be able to achieve that guideline, we need to be looking a bit more closely at how we change our eating patterns, which over time have evolved to mean that we all consume more processed foods. But how do we get back to actually consuming real food? Because it's when we consume real food that we understand much better what's in it. Most people, most kids, they don't realise how much sugar is in a cereal bar. We buy these cereal bars, they've got all kinds of claims and ticks, and they look great, but some of them have 5 teaspoons of sugar in them. A can of Coke, 10 teaspoons of sugar. And yet, we're supposed to be kind of aiming for 5 teaspoons of sugar a day. So it's those processed foods. But I guess the broader point I was trying to make is that what tends to happen when we focus in on one particular part of our diet or nutrition, like sugar, is the question is, what do we replace it with? And of course, if we drop our sugar intakes but increase our saturated fat intakes, that's not necessarily going to be good either. So it is all about that balance. And I think, I started life as a dietitian. I don't practice clinically anymore, but I think for a lot of it is about going back to that real food and really understanding what's in our food. But I think for all of us as consumers and mothers and shoppers, also I think letting the food industry know that we're not that keen on what our food supply is looking like at the moment. I work in public health nutrition, population level nutrition, and that often puts me and my colleagues at odds with the food industry, but also at government, because of exactly what you've said. I mean, we're focusing here on the sugar industry, but the food industry more broadly is, if you think about New Zealand, it's a major part of our economy. major driver of our GDP. Fonterra alone accounts for a huge amount of our GDP. For politicians, that kind of issue is paramount. And sadly, it does take precedence over the health of the population and our society and our societal well-being. And I mean, I understand that politicians, have to balance economic growth. It's good for all of us to be in an economy that's doing well and, where we're all employed. But I think the influence the food industry has on policy making and political decision making is it's really disturbing. And New Zealand is not alone. I mean, this is, as you rightly pointed out, is absolutely a global issue. I mean, the new guidance from the World Health Organization, the initial guidance they gave to reduce sugar intakes to 10% of energy, almost got derailed completely by the sugar industry, because basically the sugar industry went to all of the governments, because as you pointed out, they're very big funders of political campaigns.
You've got the young nationals doing a lot of work behind the scenes that no one in the public would ever know or hear of, because these companies are funding the political parties, and that's how they get elected. So of course the debate is not going to go anywhere near that health and nutrition argument. They don't want it because they're in favour, they're in store, because they're being funded. And you've got to be aware of that as consumers. We are more than happy to talk about the debate of sugar in diet and nutrition and things like that up there. But there's a much bigger debate you all need to be aware of. And you would never know that. You just wouldn't know that. Why would you know that? They keep it quiet.
Well, and also I think that what the industry does is they put the responsibility back on all of us as individuals. So if we're not eating well, if we're overweight, if we're developing diabetes, it's our fault, because what they push the whole time is individual responsibility. We should all be individually responsible. And that's all well and good. But actually, when we live in an environment where they are spending billions marketing their products to us and to our children, and doing it in ways that are not necessarily obvious either. I mean, if you think about all of the kind of online marketing these days and how the food industry lines up with movies to promote their products that way and so on. And I think particularly for our children, I think it is unfair to say that our children should be making better choices when the whole time they're being told, buy this, I'm tasty, I'm cheap, I'm yummy, I'm going to make you popular with your friends. The bigger problem we face as people who are advocating for change in public health and population nutrition is that the food industry are at the policy making table all of the time. So whether we're talking about things like putting taxes on sugary drinks or having better labelling on our foods so that people can better understand what's in them, or reducing the salt content or the sugar content of our food, the industry are sitting at the table. And at the end of the day, they are driven by the fact that they have to deliver a return to their shareholders. Their priority is to sell more product. It is not the health and well-being of the population. That is the priority of our government. But our government and the governments around the world, a lot of them, are handing the responsibility of that to the food industry. And I read something yesterday online, and it was funny. It was a very humorous take on what role the food industry should be playing in promoting the health of populations. But they said, oh, it's akin, they're saying, oh yeah, the food industry say, yeah, we're reformulating our products, and the health and well-being of our consumers is important. And they said, really, it's akin to, a crack dealer saying, I'm trying to reduce the crack content of my crack because I really care about the health and well-being of my customers. It's an incredible science. I mean, the food industry know better than anybody in terms of how to sell us food. That's their job. And there's a lot of really good work, a lot of good research to show that the more shelf space you give to a product, the more prominent you make it in terms of having it at eye level. I mean, next time you go into the supermarket, have a look at what's at eye level. Those products that are on the top shelves that small little people like me really struggle to get up there and reach, they're there for a reason. And the retailers and the industry, the manufacturers or the sellers have an interesting relationship, because the sellers need to get their products on the retailer's shelves, because you think about it, we all shop in supermarkets. So if you're trying to sell your product, you need to get your product on the shelves. But because of that, it makes the retailers incredibly powerful. and they can actually demand fees from industry all the time about, if you want your product, at eye level, or if you want more shelf space, you need to pay us more money. I think we need to use our voices more. We don't use them enough, and I, put myself in that category as well, that we don't actually say to retailers and industry or whatever, I don't like this. I don't like having all the lollies at the checkout so that my 2-year-old has a tantrum every time we go through, because I don't want my 2-year-old eating those foods. But one thing that industry will do is respond to consumers, and a lot of what we get as scientists and public health advocates is we get told we're only delivering what the consumer wants. We give the consumer what they want, but also the consumer takes what's presented to them. But I think we should, collectively be using our voice more to actually say, that we don't, that we do want things like sweet-free checkouts in our supermarkets, or actually that we do support taxes on sugary drinks, because we know that it will mean that our children drink less of them, and that it's part of the message that these are not healthier products. And I think industry will respond if there is a kind of a common voice and a common theme coming through. But I think that's something that we haven't done very well, and not just us as New Zealanders, but around the world. But I am beginning to see it more. I think people are starting to talk more about what is in our food, and I don't want all of this sugar, and I do want healthier options for my children. Yeah, the smartphone is an interesting thing though, because we are starting to see it it's increased exponentially in New Zealand. So nearly 70% of New Zealanders now own a smartphone, and there isn't actually the kind of the differential in terms of income and ethnicity that you see with other kinds of things. But I totally take your point. I think you make a very good point. And I think really the thing is that no one thing is ever going to work. We do need education, and we do need good labelling, and we do need governments that are implementing policy that protect children from unhealthy food advertising. And it has taken us, basically the whole rise in obesity and diet-related illness has come about in 30 years. And there's been a bit of a sea change in what's happened to our eating habits and our food environment in that time. But it's not going to turn around overnight, and it's not going to be one thing. So I agree, we do need education. The app is just one way of doing it, but of course there are other ways that we could be helping and supporting people to make healthier choices. I guess where I was going with the app is just the fact that the food industry has fought traffic light labelling tooth and nail all around the world. I mean, have spent millions fighting it in every country that's tried to introduce it, but we know that it's one way that consumers actually can understand. People understand what a red light means or what a green light means. And so we said, okay, well, we're not going to be able to get it on packages because it just keeps getting tied up in regulation. I mean, it's stalled again in Australia and New Zealand in terms of they were talking about introducing a new star labelling system, where the foods would be rated with numbers of stars according to how healthy they were, but it's got marred in debate again between the industry and government, and industry saying it's going to cost us millions and there's no indication that it will work. But really, I think we introduced the app to try and say, look, we want to help people, and we can't always be waiting for industry and government. And the reason I mentioned it in relation to what you were saying is because we see potential to do that kind of thing for allergies as well, and for other things like gluten-free. In fact, we're actually starting to work on a gluten-free version, salt switch, which is for people who need to really focus on reducing salt. So I think that's one example of some of the things that we can also be doing as individuals and consumers, because as you rightly say, we're all clever people.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure.
Really.